Hello and welcome to What the Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditas. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, October 28th, 2020. Welcome to day 1378. The United States reported another record high average number of new coronavirus cases, bringing the 7-day average to about 71,832. An increase of more than 20% compared to the previous week and about 40% from 2 weeks earlier. Over the last month, the number of people hospitalized for COVID-19 climbed an estimated 46%, and 29 states have set new records for new daily cases since the pandemic began. The U.S. as a whole reported a record of more than 500,000 new cases over the past week. One top health official warned that the country is at a, quote, critical point, end quote. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci warned that the U.S. is in a bad position as coronavirus cases and hospitalizations surge, and said that it could be as late as 2022, quote, before we start having some semblances of normality, end quote. Even though he's very certain there will be a coronavirus vaccine, quote, in the next few months, end quote, Dr. Fauci said it could easily take until the end of 2021 before we, quote, have vaccinated a substantial proportion of the people, end quote, allowing people to return to crowded theaters, sporting events, and restaurants. Dr. Fauci also predicted that masks will be very commonplace following the pandemic. Trump, on the other hand, argued that the media coverage of COVID-19 should be a, quote, election law violation, end quote, tweeting that, quote, COVID is being used by the media in total coordination in order to change our great early election numbers, end quote. Meanwhile, in mid-April, Jared Kushner bragged that Trump had cut out the doctors and scientists who were advising him on the coronavirus pandemic. In an interview with Bob Woodward, Kushner boasted that Trump had taken the country back from the doctors and said the country was at the, quote, beginning of the comeback phase, end quote. Since that April 18th interview, about 181,000 people in the United States have died from COVID-19. Moving on, Trump had more than $270 million in debt forgiven since 2010 after he defaulted on his loans for a Chicago skyscraper development. After the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago encountered financial problems, banks and hedge funds cut Trump a break, granting him years of additional time to repay his debts, much of which was ultimately forgiven. Since 2010, Trump's lenders have forgiven about $287 million in debt that he failed to repay. Trump defended his failure to repay lenders, tweeting, quote, I was able to make an appropriately great deal with the numerous lenders on a large and very beautiful tower. Doesn't that make me a smart guy rather than a bad guy? End quote. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign stranded hundreds of supporters in the freezing cold for hours after a rally at an airfield in Omaha. For several hours, hundreds of people who attended the rally were stranded on a dark, remote stretch of road near the airport, waiting for buses that didn't arrive and were unable to reach the site because of a clogged 2-lane road. The Trump campaign said it provided enough buses, quote, but local road closures and resulting congestion caused delays, end quote. At least 30 people needed medical assistance. Moving on, Trump plans to open up more than half of Alaska's Tongass National Forest to logging and development. The decision to open up one of the largest intact temperate rainforests reverses protections put in place by the Clinton administration in 2001 and represents one of the most sweeping public lands rollbacks Trump has enacted to date. And finally, former Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor revealed himself to be anonymous, the author of a 2018 New York Times op-ed that declared there was a resistance within the administration. In the op-ed, Taylor, who at the time was Chief of Staff to Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, described Trump as, quote, impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective, end quote. Taylor was also the anonymous author of A Warning, a book describing Trump as an undisciplined and amoral leader whose abuse of power threatened the foundations of American democracy. Taylor resigned from the Department of Homeland Security in June 2019. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Anditas.